Welcome to day 2 of Problem Solving with Smithsonian Experts. We're delighted to have all of you with us. Today's theme is valuing world cultures, and I can't think of a better place to start than this question about who owns music, because we're going to be listening to and looking at how people connect to music, and we're going to start with you on that question in just a moment. The day continues, by the way, with Bill Fitzhugh, and we'll be talking about what happens when a people meets its past, and we'll end day 2 of this conference looking at how people around the world solve everyday problems through design. So I hope you'll stick with us throughout the day, and I'm glad you're here with us now. We'd be happy to hear from you about what brought you to today's session, so feel free to submit some comments in the chat box on the left, and you can type in that box at any time throughout the course of the day today, and we'll do our best to address as many of your comments and questions as possible. But we do have a very large and diverse community here, so we'll do our best to address as many comments as we can. Remember, there's also a discussion board that you can continue to post to afterwards. Let me point out a couple of quick things that will help you enjoy our experience together today. In addition to chatting in that box on the left side of the screen, for those of you attending in groups, I wanted to point out that you can also text messages into us using your cell phone. You can text your messages to 99503 and just make sure the first word in your message is the word chat, and that'll ensure we get it as well. Seeing some great greetings from people joining us from as far away from Washington as Argentina and Morocco. Welcome to everyone, and as well to our friends in San Diego and Lakewood and Fleming College and so forth. Good to have you. One more quick note, we are closed captioning our webcast today, so if you are enjoying seeing those captions, you can keep them up on your screen. If you prefer to turn the captions off, you can click the CC button on the right side as I'm showing you on the screen and change the display in your menu that appears to none if you would like to do that. One last thing that we're doing is a bit of an experiment today. We have our friend joining us from just outside of London, Dan Porter. Dan is an illustrator. And one way some people connect to music is by doodling or drawing. And that's one way that Dan connects to music, although I know he has a particular interest in Folkways, which we're going to be learning about today as well. So this is a live screen from Dan in the UK where he is drawing, and we'll check in with him at the end of the session and maybe once in between to see how he captures what we all talk about and listen to in the form of drawing or graphic illustration. Dan, thanks for being here today. We'll check back in with you later. With that, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in, and I'd like to introduce to all of you, his friends call him Atesh. You see on the screen D.A. Sonneborn, and it's great to have you here. Atesh is the Associate Director of Smithsonian Folkways, and he's going to pose a pretty big question to us, and I think you might be surprised at how he approaches the answer and perhaps how you connect with music after this process. Atesh, thank you.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, as you all may be experiencing differently. Who owns music is the big question. One of the frames of reference is the law. The law can be local, it can be national, or it could be possibly global by way of treaties and conventions. Those laws state a lot of issues, and we'll cover some of them as we talk. And one of the big issues is, what are the rights of artists? These can be also addressed in law, but they're also addressed philosophically and ethically and in the hearts and minds of the people who create the music. Part of my job is to attend to all the voices and solve the problem when they're in conflict. I work for Smithsonian Folkways Recordings, which is a nonprofit record label and audio archive, and we'll talk more about it a little bit later. But right now, the big question, and how do we get to the fundamental question, how do you connect to music? When you bathe, when you're in the shower, when you're in a river, wherever you bathe, you sing? Maybe you hum? If you do, who owns that music? Do you? To someone else? Or if you listen to the radio or other broadcast media, who owns that music? If you have cassettes, CDs, or even those big black things called long-playing records, LPs. Do you own them? Who else might have a claim to that? Or do you play music? Who owns that music?
Tesh, we're seeing some very interesting responses to these provoking questions about how we connect to music. We have people like Jenny who listens to music while she cooks. I wonder how that influences what she cooks, or what it tastes like for that matter. We have a student at Milford Middle School who connects to music through feelings and physically, perhaps dancing. You can let us know what you mean by that. Claire in Lancaster uses music as a means to understand herself, but also others.
Music is a way that I also use to understand myself and others, and many people around the world move to music, dancing, tapping some part of their body, or not moving and yet experiencing the rhythm. And our friend in England experiences music kinesthetically in the body and then puts it out as art. Here at Smithsonian Folkways, we collect music. We're, first of all, a collection, a museum of sound, and we operate as a nonprofit record label and audio archive. We have about 42,000 items that you can hear, and you can hear samples of every single one of them that we have rights to on our website, which we'll offer you later. You could also subscribe to our music mostly through an academic library. There are two products. One's called Music Online and the other's called Global Sound for Libraries. You can download our products, or you can get them as compact discs, or if you're in a society that doesn't use compact disc but prefers cassettes, we can make cassette copies. We don't have only music. We also have spoken word and natural sounds, man-made sounds. There's a lot of it. And it all started here at the Smithsonian, the National Museum of the United States, with a fellow named Moses Ashe, who lived in New York. And in 1948, after two unsuccessful attempts with record companies that failed, he founded something called Folkways Records. And over the next 38 years until his death, Ashe put out 2,168 albums, we think, more or less. And he did this to create some kind of encyclopedia of sound. Some people think it was because of a meeting he had with Albert Einstein, and others think that it was his answer as a Jewish person to the denial of humanity that occurred during the Holocaust. That he wanted to say that anything that human ears could hear was worth recording and preserving, and he kept everything in print and asked for someone to keep everything available. And only the Smithsonian was able to say, we can do this. What a dream. Some of his most famous, iconic, if you will, artists are people like Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger. Let's listen to Pete for a moment.
Last night I had the strangest dream I never dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. I dreamed I saw a mighty room. The room was full of men.
Pete Seeger had a strangest dream of world peace. But it wasn't only music. There are also, as I said, sounds. What's this one? All right, I'll tell you. That one was a dump truck dumping its load in a junkyard. And here's another.
And what is that sound? We've asked you that question up on the screen. Go ahead and type in what you think you just heard. Spaceship? Somebody backing up? A backup warning? A siren? Radar? Sonar?
Oh, look, someone got it.
There it is. A satellite.
Oh, could we give them perhaps an album cover that shows a little more hint
We
for
might
some
be
more
able
people
to
can
do that.
guess?
There you go. Indeed. Voices of the satellites.
That was Sputnik. Some people say Sputnik. Pardon me, my Russian accent isn't so good. It was the first man-made satellite launched into orbit. So we collect audio. We add to that collection in several ways. Underlying our decision process is how can we reflect and represent our shared human identity. What is it that makes a community's identity in music significant? One way that we do this is we put out new recordings. Oh, sorry, we primarily collect record labels. And here's an array of record labels that we've collected. There's another collection that just was finalized this morning of traditional music from all over the world that was put out over a period of about 40 years from UNESCO that will be coming live online in months to come. We have a non-profit mission to connect to culturally significant material. What makes something culturally significant? What makes people say, this is my people's music, my place's music? Or if people are in diaspora, scattered across the world for whatever reason, this is the music of the place that my people came from, my family came from. That's the niche in the large universe of music that's available to all of us that we operate. One way that we get music is to go out and get it. It's not the primary way. You can get a lot more music in one project by acquiring a record label. Folkways had over 2,000 albums. But another one is to perhaps raise money by a grant and go to Paraguay. And in Paraguay, by the way, if you're a harpist, I know some of you are out there, the harp music is pointed to by other music cultures as, oh, the Paraguayan harp players, they're fabulous. And listen and watch.
Ya que es una zona tropical, mucha naturaleza aquí en el Paraguay, ¿verdad? El pájaro campana, que es un pájaro blanco, ¿no? Que empieza con el canto de un pájaro, después ya le contesta otro, después ya le van contestando otro y así se va formando como un coro, ¿no? Una sinfónica de pájaros, ¿no?
sounds in your life, in your community, music that you hear maybe every day that's not already recorded or widely available to others? Could you envision that becoming a recording in place? So what sort of sounds are there?
And Atesh, we've put that question up right in the center of the screen, and I wonder as people listen their way through their own day, whether it's right now or on their way to work or school, a sneeze, wind chimes, drums, a fan playing, making sounds in the background,
Birds in the early morning.
a babbling brook or a creek. Beatrice in Argentina would record her cat meowing.
I love it, the peaceful moments. They're the hardest ones to record.
Juju would find a way of recording her grandmother, while Sally would record the chickens that she hears.
Some of these things are sounds you might hear every day. Some of them are sounds you might hear only at night, or a sound that you might only hear on a holiday, or a sound that you might only hear in a place of worship. All of those might be singular and only available where you live.
One of the students joining us said that he or she would record the sound of their cat eating food.
You should write to me. We have a recording of my cat eating food, and we could trade places. My father made that recording when I was a little boy. So I noticed that a lot of you come up with natural sounds. We have a whole album of natural sounds. We actually have many albums of natural sounds, but listen to this.
The cricket frog, Acris gryllus dorsalis, is the smallest species in the chorus.
Some of the species recorded, there are over 80 different examples on this album, Sounds of North American Frogs, and we're trying to get rights to another one called Sounds of Central and South American Frogs. So this is an ongoing process. Unique album, and for some reason retains its popularity. It was originally put out by Folkways, and Smithsonian Folkways put it out again as a CD. But nature sounds, religious music, maybe we could use the term endangered music, because cultures are changing and music is moving always. We get lots of ideas from all over the world. And the question of how do we choose which music to record and distribute, how do you assess significance, includes the question of, well, what are we interested in today that was first created, say, 100 years ago, or 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago? Do we know anything about that? Yes, we do. We even know about music from 10, 20, 30,000 years ago. Not much. But what will people be interested in tomorrow is very likely to be something like what we wonder about the past today. We are custodians then. We are stewards. So one of the questions that we would ask you if you came to us with a suggestion for a recording from your place would be, why is Smithsonian Folkways the right place, the best place for your music? Why should it be recorded in the first place? Why should it be preserved? What is it that it may tell us about our shared humanity? What makes it beautiful? What makes it meaningful to you? What makes it meaningful to your whole community? What do you imagine would make it interesting to someone who never heard of you or your community before this moment? That's an important question. Does the music tell us that in and of itself? Or does it need pictures and perhaps text, words, to introduce it to someone who's never heard of you? For us at Smithsonian Folkways, we need pictures and text because we understand we're introducing things that may be heard by people across the world as different, new, strange.
We have quite a list of what might be the characteristics of music or sounds that should be recorded growing here in the center of the screen from our friends from across the world. We have many people talking about sharing the music to help people understand differences and similarities among people of the world, a theme we'll be looking at as we continue today as well. Preservation has come up a number of times, to save it for future generations. Context is an interesting one from Tortoise, who says we should, it can round out a story that might otherwise not be complete. Memories, history, enjoyment. We even have people looking at practical reasons to record music, like Lisa here, who says maybe scientists could use the sound of animals to attract others of that species in the wild.
We have many of those things in our collection already, and for very much those same sorts of reasons. And we continue to collect. Here's a key question, I think. When I meet something or someone new, strange, when you meet something or someone new, we may feel fear or curiosity. I believe that these are the fundamental human emotions, responses to the new. So, for example, does this conversation, even what I'm saying now, does it make you feel a little uncomfortable? Or does it invite your curiosity? So we ask the question, how do we mediate between what you have never encountered to raise the curiosity versus fear? Let me ask you all, when a stranger comes into your community, someone you've never seen before, how do you receive them? How do you receive them into your house? Someone who's never come over before. There's just a knock on the door or a holler. As a community, how do you welcome a stranger? Do you welcome them with fear? Or do you welcome them with welcome, with curiosity?
And we're certainly curious to hear how you do greet people into your home. How do you greet strangers? Go ahead and tell us in your life, in your family, in your culture, how you address things people that are new. And by the way, 84% of our audience, not to quantify it or anything, said that when they come across something new, they think of themselves as being more curious than afraid. We do have a few people, a small audience. We do have a number of people who want to think about that a bit. They haven't quite asked themselves that question yet.
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, because indeed, under certain circumstances, things are simply too much for us to handle, and our first response may be fear. We're built that way. Do you remember when you were 2 and you heard thunder? It scared you. Teach your children to roar like a lion when they hear thunder, when you have children, if you have children. For us, when we come up with a situation in the modern world, the contemporary world, we sometimes answer by releasing an album. For example, when I heard that the United States was going to invade Iraq, I went to my boss, our director, Dan Sheehy, and I said, Dr. Sheehy, we're going to invade Iraq, and as such, we have an opportunity to represent the Iraqi culture, which is a long-lived one, in its music, because it has music that goes back perhaps to Babylon and Ur and Sumeria. So he said, go for it. And I looked all over the world to find some way to represent this old, rich culture that would be deeper than the picture we would get from mainstream media. And I found a fellow, a refugee from political oppression in Iraq named Rahim al-Hajj, plays the oud, a short-necked lute from that region of the world. And before I talk more about that, let's meet Rahim in the studio at the moment when he was recording this album. I asked Rahim to give us a picture of Iraqi classical music, and knowing that he was a human being living with the rest of us in this time, the 21st century, by so doing, he would show the interaction between the old and today. So I didn't know enough about Iraqi music myself, so I contacted scholars around the world to learn more, and I wrote the notes with their help, and we had the notes translated into Arabic. The notes for this and all the albums that Smithsonian Folkways has either issued or acquired are online and available as free PDF files for download. We did it in Arabic and English because not everyone speaks English, even though it is an important language in world education. And the album must have done well because it was nominated for a Grammy, which in the United States is a way that the music industry says good work. So in a large sense, we invite people, we invite you, your friends, your family, your teachers, everyone, to come and meet other cultures. One of the really interesting things about meeting other cultures is, and it's a way to discover and understand your own interest in music, is think for a minute about how does music strike the brain? How does it reach us? And there have been some measurements. I'm more of a humanist than a physical scientist, but there have been some brainwave studies that indicate that music goes to a very primitive place before language, somewhere near where emotions arise, but it affects both left and right brain. So I don't know, I think about my first musical moments. What are your first musical moments? Tell us a little about them, because they're really interesting. I remember standing in front of the radio in my family's house and conducting the stream of music that was coming out of it. I felt like I was flying. I see people remembering a family member playing an instrument. These early memories influence what happens to us as we grow, as our life goes on. I grew up in Chicago. It's a city near a big lake in the middle of the United States. It was a middle-class existence. Virtually everyone in the neighborhood was Caucasian. It was the overriding American Judeo-Christian ethical, cultural stance. And one day my mom brought home an album of belly dancing music. Well, belly dancing music arises out of childbirth exercises and entertainment, both in the Near East. Egypt, Syria are centers of belly dance music. And I heard some of this material, and I just thought it was wonderful. It was as if a window opened to a completely different way of experiencing the world, music. It may be why I became an ethnomusicologist. That's me on the right at around that time. And I don't know who she is on the left, but we put out an album of belly dance music recorded in the United States. This isn't the one that my mother brought home, but this one, interestingly, that one, which was called Port Said, after the city in Egypt. I was sitting in a Near Eastern ensemble at University of California in Los Angeles, where I pursued my doctoral degree. And it has an ensemble. I was playing oud, not as well as Rahim, I assure you. And one of those evenings, a fellow walked in, an older guy, and he sat down and he played drums. And at the break, I started talking to him, and it turned out he was Eddie the Sheikh. Eddie played on Port Said. And it wasn't recorded in Damascus or Cairo. It was recorded in the back of a grocery store in Brooklyn. Brooklyn's part of New York City. Well, it shot down that idea, but he was an interesting guy, and he was, if I recall correctly, of Lebanese extraction. Let's listen to a little belly dance music. So this is music very much of a place from a musical, historical perspective. Let's look again at the question, whose music is that? Is that the music of the folks in Brooklyn? Is that the people's music in Damascus and Syria? Who owns that music would be all of them. And who owns that recording would be whomever owns that recording. And who owns the underlying compositions, if any? And that answer is determined either by law or by custom. We'll talk about that some more. Think about it. Your music, the music you told us about earlier, what does it tell us about our shared humanity? I see it expresses the soul. I see that humans are said to be the only species who make music. We're not sure of that anymore. Dolphins may have a complex repertoire of music making. We don't know yet. Moses Ash, the founder of Folkways, he knew about the importance of learning music when we're young. And as far back as in the middle 1950s, he was putting out music from a very wonderful lady, we call her the first lady of children's music, named Ella Jenkins. In the mid-50s, and still working with us today, Ella had the idea of presenting music from all over the world to little children, children before kindergarten. And why don't we meet her?
Okay, that's it. Okay. I'm gonna... I was down in Florida. Anybody been to Florida before? Okay. I was in a car with some lady who was taking me to a conference. And on the highway, I saw a sign that says, Okeechobee. I said, Okeechobee? I said, where is that? She says, right over there by Pahokee. So, anyway, when I stop singing, you say Okeechobee, okay? It's an Indian word, okay? I know a city called I know a county called I know a lake called Okeechobee, Florida. Now there's a Seminole reservation near. There's a Seminole reservation near. There's a Seminole reservation near Okeechobee, Florida. Now, you know, I sang the song down in Okeechobee, and the children said, we like your song, but there's a lot of things you didn't know about Okeechobee. So the little girl says, there's a lot of bugs down in
website, and also in the virtual exhibit hall, which is available right near here online. Ella Jenkins has been recorded by us for over half a century, but we also every now and then encounter someone who's sort of the same lineage. She's got the same idea, or he's got the same idea. I'd like you to meet another Smithsonian Folkways artist. An album was called You Are My Little Bird, and her name is Elizabeth Mitchell. I think we have some video of her as well.
Little bird, fly through my window. Little bird, fly through my window. Little bird, fly through my window. Find molasses candy through my window. My sugar lump, fly through my window. My sugar lump, find molasses candy. Who knows a bird?
Me, chickadee.
What does chickadee say?
Of the same people, sort of part of this family that understands this deep place that music reaches, and particularly where we can reach children. We also recently put out an album by Woody Guthrie's granddaughter. Guthrie was one of Moses Ashe's most important artists. We'll hear something from him a little bit later, but here's Sarah Lee Guthrie, Johnny Irion, and friends.
Atesh wants me to stop this one, but this is one of my favorites, so I'm keeping it playing for a little longer. Okay, go ahead, Atesh. I'm sorry.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan. One of the great things about children's music is that it's everywhere, because everyone has children. It's really a human characteristic to reproduce. And a great way to think about this big question about who owns music is to look for it among the young people. We're going to take a journey now somewhat away from the young people here. Well, hold on a second. I promised to tell you about Woody Guthrie. Sarah Lee Guthrie's grandfather, Woody Guthrie, is one of the most important songwriters in the English language of the 20th century. And Ash put out a lot of recordings by him. And probably for those of you who are far away may not have encountered him, here's an example of one of his songs, probably the best known.
This land is your land, and this land is my land, from the California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went a-walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway, saw below me that golden skyway, saw below me that golden...
Woody Guthrie. So I promised to take you far away from the United States, and here we go. We're going to the southern highlands province of Papua New Guinea, a region and a people called the Bosavi. A man named Stephen Feld went there. He was on his way to Africa and stopped off to visit a friend over 30 years ago. And he encountered the Bosavi people, and he started recording them. He worked there for about 30 years, in fact, and then he finally continued his journey, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Here's a piece about who owns music. He wanted to share their music. The people in the community said, okay, we can share the music. He said, some of the income that comes from this needs to come back here to the community. They said, okay, what are we going to do with that? And they met as a community, the elders, the adults, the teenagers, the children. And they decided together that they would build a music house. They built a music house to go into and make music. More royalties came. They put solar panels on the roof of the music house. More royalties came. They bought guitars. And a whole new generation began to make a whole new music. Here's a little bit of that.
Laido se laido
so they accepted the idea of receiving royalties for the performance of their music, but underlying it, there's another idea. In law, there's another idea of the composer getting some royalty. In the United States, it's set by law how much money they get per unit of their material sold. These people were asked, well, whose music is this? And while they acknowledge that it is composed by one person in the sense that we in the West have, they don't believe that it's theirs. They hear music, the source of inspiration, as coming from their ancestors' spirits. And they hear it in the sounds of waterfall, in the sounds of birds. Remember, many of you found that as a really important sound for you. This is a whole other level of importance. This is where music comes from. It belongs to the ancestors. Here's an example. Again, all this music is available via our website, or it's in the virtual exhibit hall now. So this is a very complicated question. Who owns music? The ancestor spirits. Well, we have no way to send them checks. They can't claim the copyright. And Stephen did a really brilliant job before he left Papua New Guinea in recording with the sounds of waterfalls and the sounds of birds. Our promise when we take on a recording is that we'll keep it available and we'll continue to pay royalties. We believe here that the underlying music is owned by the creators of the music. There are places in the world that disagree. Stephen left Papua New Guinea and finally made it to Africa just a few years ago. And he met a saxophone player who introduced him to some truck drivers who, having created an ensemble for truck drivers' funerals at the Truck Drivers Union Hall, recorded an album that we just had to put out. And we did it in the honor of the 50th anniversary of the Ghanaian Republic. Let's have a listen and watch. So I ask you, what is music? Was that music? How do you perceive it? They perceive it as music. What do we have to do to perceive it as music? What ideas arise about these folks? I could tell you stories, but we're getting near the end of time. Not all time. If music moves you emotionally, how did it get there? Does it come through your mind? Does it come through your heart? How did it get into your heart? When you meet a new music, do you have questions about the people who created the music? Or do you sometimes close the doors of your mind and your doors of your heart and walk away? If you ask more questions, what questions do you ask? Please add to your question, who owns the music that you love? If you're curious and you ask those questions, you can own a piece of it too. If you're fearful, if you walk away from music, it's not yours. We think artists have a right to make a living if they want to from their music, so we do what we can to help them. We pay royalties. We, in fact, instituted a policy unheard of in the music business to increase royalties when the collection first came to the Smithsonian in the 1980s. And we keep this promise to keep the music available forever. I see a request for a famous old tune from the world of popular music, and it's really interesting because popular is not what we feel we need to take care of, what we need to steward, because the mainstream culture takes care of it. There are millions of copies of popular music. Some of our things sell one copy every 10 years. Some of them sell 10,000 copies a year. It doesn't matter. It didn't matter to Moses Ash. He said something along the lines of, we don't use the letter Q as much as we use the letter R and S. So you're going to take that out of the alphabet? He kept everything available, and so do we. We're going to try and keep it available forever. Come visit us online at www.folkways.si.edu.
And we're actually showing a picture of what you'll find at that website. It's clickable. You can click off to visit the site as well. And there's a great search feature on that site, isn't there?
I think this search feature, which we're always trying to improve, is a wonderful way to follow that aspect of curiosity, because you can search by country, by artist name, even by a word that represents an idea. You can search by culture group. You can search by genre of music, and there are far more genres than you'll find in your average recording store, if you have an average recording store anywhere near you. So please, come and visit. Come and look at the stuff in the virtual exhibit hall. Follow your curiosity. Enjoy.
Atesh, thank you very much. You've made an impression on a number of people here, many of whom it seems are off to look for music in their own lives that they might not have thought existed, and others off to your website to check out what you have there. I would like to remind you of a couple of things. You can continue your exploration as well in the virtual exhibit hall. I would also like to check in with our illustrator, Dan. If he has a drawing he wishes to share, he can go ahead and begin to bring that up, and we can see how he captured our session today in the form of a graphical representation of a discussion about music. So we might check in with Dan, and during the break between now and our next session with Bill Fitzhugh. So I'll bring up his illustration as well in just a second. I also wanted to remind you that all of the recordings from yesterday's sessions, in some cases maybe some music from yesterday, you can check that out in the program area of the site. All 3 sessions from day 1 are there, and Atesh's session will join them shortly. We'll go ahead and leave the chat open here for all of you to continue to connect with each other, but remember, you can also use the discussion area of the site below Atesh's session description to continue posting ideas, links, and so forth. All right. Stay tuned. Stay right where you are for the next session with Bill Fitzhugh, and we'll bring up some of Dan's illustrations during the break as well. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Atesh.
You're welcome. Thank you all.